Hello ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for watching the show. This is your Top Human Rights Organization Review, and I'm your host, Bryce Dolan. Now today on the show we're going to look at 5 different top human rights organizations and look at the top stories from each one of their websites. To begin the show, Human Rights Watch helps pressure governments to release the unjustly jailed with the hashtag #FreeThem campaign. Many courageous individuals, journalists, lawyers, activists, artists, members of the political oppositions or protesters sit behind bars for daring to speak the truth, to challenge dictators, to unveil corruption, to stand up for the marginalized, or to demand freedom, justice, and rights. They are often beaten, humiliated, tortured, threatened, and what is worse, forgotten. Every week, Human Rights Watch highlights one of these brave individuals who have paid a high price and are unjustly jailed for the peaceful exercise of their fundamental rights. We ask you to help draw attention to their cases and demand that world leaders and others with leverage do all they can to immediately free them. Eskinder Nega has been imprisoned 8 times for writings over the years. His experience encapsulates the situation facing many of Ethiopia's independent journalists, who must choose between self-censorship, arrest, or living in exile. He was first jailed after the massive crackdown following the 2005 election, along with his wife and fellow journalist, Serkalem Fasil, who gave birth to their first child in Kalidi prison in 2006. Eskinder is currently serving an 18-year prison term after being convicted under the counterterrorism law in 2012. The United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention has concluded that Eskinder's detention was arbitrary and called for his immediate release and reparations. Recent measures announced under Ethiopia's state of emergency further close the space for media freedom, with bans on social media, restrictions on opposition political parties speaking to media, and bans on watching diaspora television. If you visit the website, the Human Rights Watch website, and go to this article, you will see a button at the top and it'll say tweet. If you click on the tweet button, it'll create an automated tweet directed at John Kerry and several other officials asking for them to call out Ethiopia to release these individuals. And it also includes the hashtag #FreeThem. So I encourage you to go to this article, go to this website. You can find the link directly to it below in the description. Send out this tweet and use the hashtag #FreeThem. Now next, Refugees International says the Kenyan government's threat to close the Dadaab refugee camp by the end of November would not only endanger the lives of several 100,000 Somali refugees, but has already caused irreparable harm and damage. With no alternative options, some refugees have been coerced into repatriating to Somalia, where insecurity and an ongoing humanitarian crisis continue. The United Nations refugee agencies focus on expediting the pace of returns in the face of political pressure from Kenya. This promotes large-scale returns that are unlikely to be sustainable. Development and reintegration initiatives in designated areas of return in Somalia need time to take hold. And in the meantime, support for Somalia refugees who remain in Kenya cannot be abandoned. Kenya faces very real and very serious security challenges, but it is harmful and wrong to blame the Somali refugee population, people who themselves fled to Kenya seeking refuge from violence, persecution, and turmoil at home. So we're going to stay on the topic of these Somali refugees with our next story as we move right into it. Next, the NRC, the Norwegian Refugee Council, follows refugees returning to Somalia and interviewed Amina. Amina is among thousands of returnees from the Dadaab refugee camp who are trying to pick up their lives in Somalia after leaving the refugee camp. After spending 14 years living as a refugee, the decision to return to Somalia together with her 7 children was a difficult one. Although she left out of her own will, life was becoming increasingly uncertain and challenging. Supported by the UK Department for International Development, the NRC is helping returnees to integrate locally. A Housing, Land and Property Cross-Border Program, or HLP, has been established, providing information and cross-border referrals to enable returnees reclaim their assets upon return. Now, together with other returnees in Dalo, Amina is a participant in the NRC's Cash for Work initiative, which is using drip irrigation methods to grow crops within communal farms. The Voluntary Returns Program has assisted over 30,000 Somali refugees from the Dadaab refugee camp. Between May and September 2016, the Protection and Return Monitoring Network, or the PRMN, has documented an average of 12,054 people crossing the Kenya-Somalia border into Somalia. The most common reasons for cross-border movement has been search of better social relations, economic opportunity, and permanently resettling in Somalia. However, as already highlighted by humanitarian agencies, internal displacement coupled with increasing number of returns from Kenya, Ethiopia, and Yemen, and limited humanitarian funding will result in a situation where people resort to desperate measures in order to survive. So the NRC kind of agreeing with Refugees International, saying that they're not really ready to take on this many returnees into Somalia. The NRC kind of describes some of the programs that they are setting up, but like Refugees International says, they need to take time and let time pass for these programs to take hold in the area. So even though these programs are just starting up and they're great, they still need to build over time and become strong so they have the appropriate funding and the appropriate aid so people in Somalia don't have to resort to desperate measures for survival. Now next, Amnesty International fears for the safety of civilians in Aleppo, as media reports indicate that a fleet of Russian warships have made their way to Latakia on the Syrian coast in recent days, indicating that Syria and Russian forces are preparing a final bloody assault to seize control of the city. Even in times of war, there are fundamental rules that all parties must obey. Civilians must never be deliberately targeted, and armed forces must never indiscriminately bombard populated areas. Syrian government forces with Russian support have systematically violated international humanitarian law in eastern Aleppo and throughout Syria, unlawfully killing tens of thousands of civilians. And armed opposition groups have indiscriminately bombarded civilian areas in western Aleppo and elsewhere, said Samah Hadid, Deputy Director for Campaigns at Amnesty International's Beirut Regional Office. The scale of the devastation in eastern Aleppo in recent months has been chilling. Given the track record of the forces fighting in Aleppo, particularly government forces, Amnesty International fears there will be very high civilian casualties as Syrian forces, supported by Russia, escalate attacks in order to seize control of the city. So just yesterday we posted a video for your top human rights, or for your top think tanks review, and we showed a video of a bomb being dropped on a very large school complex in Aleppo. So the Russian warships have finally reached Syria, and it looks like they're preparing for a final offensive. And this has been a bloody, drawn-out battle between the opposition and the Syrian government forces. So even though it's been a devastating attack and a devastating battle over the city of Aleppo, hopefully this final offensive will be quick, and after the final offensive will be over, hopefully that's exactly what it is, the final offensive. But we won't know until after it's done, and unfortunately when that final attack does happen, you know that there are going to be civilian casualties. So we only hope for the protection and the safety of the civilians caught in that nasty crossfire, and who have been caught in that nasty crossfire without anywhere to go. Now, to end the show, UN Watch says the UN is to condemn North Korea for exploiting overseas laborers. Among the 4 human rights resolutions on country situations to be adopted by the General Assembly this year is the resolution on human rights in North Korea. UN Watch welcomes the resolution and is gratified that it includes, for the first time, specific mention to the plight of North Korean overseas workers. UN Watch first raised the issue of North Korea's abuse of overseas workers on March 16, 2015, during the UN Human Rights Council debate on North Korea, in the presence of the Special Rapporteur Marzuki Darusman. Taking the floor on behalf of UN Watch, our partners from NK Watch delivered this statement.
The next speaker is United Nations Watch.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm honored to make this statement on behalf of UN Watch. My name is Dasun Kim from NK Watch, an organization established by the survivors of North Korean political prison camps. Sitting here next to me is Mr. An, a former concentration camp guard who has been a key witness at the COI, whose report we fully endorse. Recently in this chamber, the North Korean foreign minister attacked the credibility of this report as well as that of the defectors. The COI report was based on the testimonies of numerous North Korean defectors and is not affected in any significant way by what witnesses change in secondary details of his account. Mr. Rapporteur, we welcome your report and your strategy to address the issue of missing persons. We have interviewed many North Korean families whose members have involuntarily disappeared or been arbitrarily detained. Their submissions are before the working groups on disappearances and on arbitrary detention. The North Korean authorities should be held accountable for these ongoing violations, which are devoid of any legal process. We wish to raise the issue of the North Korean overseas workers, which has so far escaped international attention. Numerous North Korean workers are dispatched abroad, watched, and controlled by the DPRK authorities 24/7, overworked every day without any holiday or rest, and do not receive any medical treatment or compensation. North Korean authorities are exploiting their salaries and using that money for their own means. The condition of these workers is much like slavery, unfortunately, with the complicity of many other governments which host these workers. My organization has interviewed such workers and submitted their testimonies to the Special Rapporteur on Slavery. Mr. Rapporteur, we ask you to please examine the case of the North Korean overseas workers and hold to account not only North Korea but also the governments that cooperate with them. Thank you.
Finally, may I express also appreciation for the interventions of the NGOs that who have flagged also the issue, the known issue of the recent North Korean, so-called North Korean overseas workers, enforced workers, and the fact that there may be, of course, and there is, of course, the need to further coordinate with the thematic working groups within the United Nations.
Now, if you had trouble hearing the report, or if you had trouble understanding the statement that was given in the video, the written statement is on this article, and you can find the link below in the description. In his report to the General Assembly on October 28, 2015, Darusman discussed in detail the plight of the North Korean overseas workers, their slave-like treatment, as well as how the regime profits in millions of dollars from their labor. Now, 1 year later, the United Nations, with this General Assembly resolution, is doing the right thing by heeding the voices of the victims. So, even though it was introduced last year, and it's taken a year for this resolution to come about, it's here, and it's going to happen, and North Korea is going to be held accountable for the slave-like conditions they've been putting their overseas laborers in. So, this is great news for the laborers in North Korea. And again, like I said, ladies and gentlemen, if you weren't able to really understand the statement in the video, which some parts are kind of difficult to hear or understand, feel free to go to this article and you can see the written dialogue of the entire statement made back in March of 2015. But ladies and gentlemen, that does it for your top human rights organization review. I want to thank you for watching the show. You can find the links to all of these articles below in the description. The links will take you directly to the articles on their respective websites. I encourage you to check them out. Remember to help draw attention with the hashtag #FreeThem when you're using Twitter this week and for weeks to come. Feel free to send that tweet to John Kerry and those other officials to call out Ethiopia as well. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that does it for the video today. Thank you very much for watching. I was your host, Bryce Dolan.